happens when a heart, shattered by loss, is asked to love again? Can the deepest grief make way for a new beginning, or is some pain meant to last forever? Today's story is about Eleanor, a woman whose life ended the day she lost her son. She believed her story was over, but a chance encounter with a small, lonely boy would force her to ask herself if she had the strength to turn to a new, unwritten chapter. Prepare for a journey of heartbreak, hope, and the incredible power of a love that refuses to be forgotten. 5 years. For Eleanor, it was a lifetime. 5 years since the phone call that had cleaved her life into a before and an after. Her son, Daniel, 16 years old, with a smile that could light up a room, had died on a high school hiking trip in the mountains of Colorado. A sudden rock slide, a freak accident, the counselors had said. But all Eleanor heard was gone. The grief was a physical presence in her home, a dense fog that choked out laughter and light. Her husband, Mark, couldn't breathe in it. They tried counselling, but their shared sorrow became a chasm between them, filled with unspoken blame and hollow apologies. He left 2 years after the funeral, and the house grew even quieter. Eleanor remained, a ghost in her own life. Her world shrunk to her sterile office job and the meticulously preserved bedroom of the boy who would never come home. The end of her old life, or what was left of it, arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet ping of an email. Eleanor stared at the screen in her grey cubicle, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. The subject line was coldly corporate. Organisational restructuring announcement. Her eyes scanned the jargon-filled paragraphs, words like synergy and streamlining blurring together, until they landed on the final brutal point. Her position as senior records administrator was being eliminated. Effective immediately, a box would be sent for her personal belongings. Just like that, the last pillar holding up her fragile routine crumbled into dust. The job hadn't been a passion, but it had been a reason to get out of bed, a place to go, a way to mark the passing of days that otherwise felt identical in their emptiness. Now even that was gone. The drive home was an automated blur. Her hands knew the turns, her foot the pressure on the pedals, but her mind was a blank slate. The tidy suburban streets of Naperville, with their manicured lawns and family minivans, felt like a scene from a movie she was no longer in. She pulled into the driveway of her 2-story colonial, the house they had bought when Daniel was 5, the house that now felt like a mausoleum. Inside, the silence was deafening, amplified by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was the same silence that had greeted her every day for 5 years, but today it felt different. It was heavier, more absolute. There was nowhere to go tomorrow, no meetings to attend, no reports to file. There was just this house filled with memories and the suffocating presence of a life that was no longer hers. Her feet carried her up the stairs, bypassing her own bedroom and stopping before a closed door. Daniel's room. She hadn't changed a thing. His hiking trophies still lined the shelves. His favourite band posters were still tacked to the wall. A half-finished model airplane sat on his desk. The air was thick with the faint, lingering scent of his laundry detergent and something that was just him. For 5 years, this room had been a sacred, untouchable shrine, a place of quiet pilgrimage. But today, standing on the threshold with the wreckage of her career in her mind, she felt a sudden, desperate urge. She had to do something. She had to change something. With a deep, shuddering breath, she stepped inside, the decision finally made. It was time to pack it all away. She started with the bookshelf, her fingers tracing the spines of novels he'd loved. Each object was a landmine of memory. Picking up a warm baseball glove, she was instantly transported back to a sun-drenched Saturday at the park, the sound of his laughter echoing in her ears. A wave of guilt washed over her as she remembered their last conversation, the morning he'd left for that trip. He had been so excited. She had been anxious, fussing over his packing. "Mom, I'll be fine. It's just a week," he'd said, a hint of teenage annoyance in his voice. She'd wanted to tell him not to go, to stay home where he was safe, but she'd just hugged him, said, "Be careful," and watched him walk away, The memory was a sharp, physical pain in her chest, a constant reminder of all the things she wished she had said and done differently. As she cleared his desk, a small, brightly coloured postcard slipped out from under a textbook. It was a picture of the Chicago skyline. She turned it over. Daniel's familiar, slightly messy handwriting covered the back. It wasn't addressed or stamped. It was just a simple message, clearly intended to be left for her as a surprise. Just in case I forget to say it enough. Love you, Mom. The 4 simple words shattered the fragile dam she had built around her heart. A sob, raw and guttural, tore from her throat. It wasn't the quiet, dignified weeping of the past 5 years. This was a storm of grief, a torrent of pain she had held back for so long. She collapsed onto his bed, clutching the postcard to her chest, the paper growing damp with her tears as the full weight of her loss crashed down on her all over again. That night, exhaustion finally claimed her, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. But in the hazy space just before dawn, Daniel came to her. It wasn't a conversation filled with words of wisdom or ghostly proclamations. He was just there. She saw him standing, not as a teenager, but as a young man, across a field bathed in a warm, golden light. He didn't speak, but he looked at her and smiled. It was the smile she remembered, the one that reached his eyes full of life and a profound sense of peace. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, "It's okay." Then he turned and walked into the light, growing fainter until he disappeared completely. There was no sadness in his departure, only a feeling of warmth, of release that settled deep within her soul. Eleanor awoke with the sun streaming through her window, the feeling of the dream still clinging to her like a warm blanket. The crushing weight on her chest felt lighter, not gone, but different, changed. The despair that had been her constant companion was replaced by a strange and unfamiliar calm. She looked at the postcard from Daniel still resting on her nightstand. "Love you, Mom." For the first time, the words felt less like a painful reminder of what she'd lost, and more like a gentle permission to move forward. She didn't know what that meant or what she was supposed to do, but she knew she couldn't stay in the house. She got dressed, not in her usual muted greys, but in a soft blue sweater she hadn't worn in years. She knew where she needed to go. The cemetery was quiet, shrouded in the damp chill of a late November morning. A persistent drizzle slicked the asphalt paths and clung to the bare branches of the oak trees, making the grey headstones glisten. Eleanor walked the familiar route, her boots crunching softly on the wet gravel. Daniel's grave was on a small hill overlooking a quiet pond. The simple granite marker read, "Daniel Miller, beloved son, gone too soon." She knelt, her hand resting on the cold, damp stone, and began to speak to him, her voice a soft murmur against the patter of the rain. She told him about losing her job, about the postcard, about her dream. It was a one-sided conversation, as always, but today it felt less like talking to a memory and more like connecting with the spirit. As she was about to leave, a small splash of colour against the sea of grey caught her eye. A few rows over, partially hidden by a large marble angel, was a small figure huddled beside a headstone. It was a child, wearing a bright red raincoat, sitting perfectly still on the wet ground. A prickle of unease ran down Eleanor's spine. It was a weekday morning, cold and miserable. No one else was around. What was a child doing here all alone? For a moment she hesitated, caught between the desire not to interfere and a growing sense of concern. The child hadn't moved a muscle. He looked so small and vulnerable against the backdrop of silent stones. She took a deep breath and walked slowly towards him, her footsteps quiet on the soaked grass. As she got closer, she could see he was a little boy, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with a mop of dark, curly hair peeking out from under his hood. His face was pale and tear-streaked. He was staring intently at the names carved into the stone in front of him. "Hello?" Eleanor said softly, not wanting to startle him. The boy jumped, his wide, brown eyes fixing on her with a mixture of fear and defiance. He clutched a small, worn teddy bear tighter to his chest. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, keeping her distance. "Are you here with someone?" The boy just shook his head, his lower lip trembling as a fresh wave of tears welled in his eyes. "I'm visiting my mom and dad," he whispered, his voice raspy. He pointed a small finger at the headstone. Eleanor's heart clenched. "I ran away," he added in a small voice, "from the group home." He explained that he'd slipped out after breakfast because he missed them so much. His name was Leo. Her mind raced. A runaway from a group home, alone and shivering in a cemetery. Every instinct told her to call the police, to find an official to handle this. But looking at his desolate, lonely face, another, more powerful instinct took over. The same one that used to check for monsters under Daniel's bed. "You must be freezing, Leo," she said, her voice full of a warmth she hadn't felt in years. "How about we go get some hot chocolate, and you can tell me all about it?" Leo looked at her warily for a moment, then gave a small nod. They walked out of the cemetery together, his small, cold hand hesitantly finding its way into hers. She took him to a classic cozy diner nearby, the kind with red vinyl booths, and the smell of coffee and bacon in the air. As he sat wrapped around a large mug of hot chocolate, his story came tumbling out. His parents had died in a car accident almost a year ago. He had no other family, so he was sent to the Northwood Children's Home. He didn't like it there. Some of the older boys were mean, and it was always loud. He just wanted to be with his parents. As she listened, Eleanor felt a profound, aching connection to this small, heartbroken child. His grief was new and raw, while hers was old and worn, but they were speaking the same language of loss. After an hour, Eleanor knew what she had to do. With Leo's reluctant agreement, she drove him back to the group home, a large, impersonal brick building that looked more like a school than a home. She walked him inside, where a flustered-looking woman with a clipboard rushed towards them. This was Miss Albright, the director. Relief washed over the woman's face when she saw Leo, quickly followed by a stern lecture about the danger of running off. But Eleanor stepped in, calmly explaining where she'd found him, and that he'd just been missing his parents. Miss Albright's expression softened. As she led Leo away to get into some dry clothes, Eleanor stopped her. "I'd like to talk to you," she said, the words coming out before she'd even fully formed the thought, "about what it takes to become a foster parent, or maybe to adopt." Driving away from the children's home, Eleanor's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The fog of the past 5 years had finally lifted, replaced by a clear, sharp sense of purpose. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Adopting a child? Her? A single woman in her mid-40s with a broken heart and no job? It sounded insane, but the image of Leo's sad, lonely eyes was burned into her mind. For the first time since Daniel's death, she felt a pull towards the future, not a retreat into the past. It wasn't about replacing Daniel. She knew that was impossible. It was about offering the love that still filled her heart, a love that had nowhere to go, to a child who desperately needed it. She gripped the steering wheel, a fierce determination solidifying within her. She was going to do this. She was going to bring Leo home. The path to adoption was a mountain of paperwork and bureaucracy, home studies, background checks, financial disclosures, parenting classes. It was daunting, but Eleanor tackled it with a focus she hadn't possessed in years. Each form filled out, each interview completed, was a step closer to Leo. But the biggest hurdle remained. She needed a stable job. She spent her days scouring online listings and sending out resumes, facing the discouraging reality of being an unemployed woman over 40. Doubt began to creep in. Was this just a foolish, emotional impulse? Was she truly capable of starting over, of providing a stable home for a grieving child when she was still so broken herself? Just when her hope began to wane, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. On the other end was the voice of her old boss, Mr. Henderson, the man who had hired her at her previous job. He told her he'd left the company shortly after she was laid off and had started a new position at a smaller, family-owned logistics firm. He'd heard what happened and was calling to offer her a job as his office manager. The pay was better, the environment less corporate. "I know your work ethic, Eleanor," he said. You're reliable and you're one of the most organised people I've ever met. We need someone like you." Eleanor was speechless, tears welling in her eyes. It felt like a lifeline, a sign from the universe that she was on the right path. She accepted on the spot. The new job was a godsend. It gave her day structure and her mind something to focus on, besides her own grief and the slow-turning wheels of the adoption agency. She found she was good at it, and the small, friendly team treated her with a kindness and respect that slowly began to rebuild her shattered confidence. She was no longer just Daniel's grieving mother or the laid-off administrator. She was Eleanor Miller, the capable office manager. She started smiling at her co-workers, engaging in small talk by the coffee machine. It was as if dormant parts of her personality were slowly reawakening. The paychecks provided the financial stability she needed for the adoption, but the sense of purpose and normalcy it gave her was priceless. With her life stabilising, she began visiting Leo at the group home every week. Their bond grew stronger with each visit. They'd play Go Fish, build towering Lego castles, and read adventure stories aloud. She learned that he loved drawing dinosaurs and hated green beans. He learned that she could make a perfect grilled cheese sandwich, and that she sometimes got a sad look in her eyes. She told him it was because she missed someone too. She brought him books and small toys, but mostly she brought him her undivided attention. For a few hours each week, he was the centre of her universe, and for a boy who felt lost in the system, that was the greatest gift of all. Finally, the day came when she was approved to take Leo for a weekend visit. The excitement and nervousness she felt were overwhelming. As he walked into her house, his small backpack slung over his shoulder, he looked around with wide, curious eyes. She showed him the room that would be his, freshly painted in a cheerful blue, with a new bed and a desk for drawing. It was Daniel's old room, but it was different now, transformed. It was a space for the future, not a shrine to the past. That evening, as she tucked him into bed, he looked up at her and said, "This feels like a real home." Eleanor's heart swelled with a feeling so powerful, so full of love and hope, that it almost took her breath away. On Sunday afternoon, as they were playing a board game in the living room, Leo noticed a framed photo on the mantel. It was a picture of a smiling, sandy-haired teenager in a baseball uniform. "Who's that?" he asked. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. That's my son, Daniel," she said, her voice soft. Leo looked from the photo to her face. "Is he the one you miss?" he asked quietly. Eleanor nodded, a lump forming in her throat. She expected him to get quiet or change the subject, but he didn't. He just looked at the photo for a long moment and then said, "He has a nice smile." For the first time, she was able to talk about Daniel to someone without the conversation being suffocated by pity or awkwardness. She was just a mom, talking about her son, to the boy who was slowly healing her heart. The final adoption hearing was just weeks away. Everything was falling into place. Eleanor had already started buying school supplies for Leo, planning for his first day of first grade. Her life, once a desolate grey, was now filled with colour and light. Then the phone call came. It was Ms. Albright from the group home. Her voice was gentle but held an undercurrent of sorrow. "Eleanor, I have some difficult news," she began. "We've been contacted by a relative of Leo's, his paternal uncle. He's been out of the country dealing with some personal matters, but he's back now, and he wants to petition for custody." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. The world tilted on its axis, and the bright, hopeful future she had so carefully constructed shattered into a million pieces. Despair, cold and familiar, wrapped its arms around her. She had been a fool to hope, a fool to believe she could have this. The universe was just cruel, dangling happiness in front of her, only to snatch it away. That evening, the first real snow of the season began to fall. Eleanor wandered out of her house without a coat, walking aimlessly through the quiet, snow-covered streets. The soft, silent flakes felt like ashes, blanketing a world that had once again lost its colour. How could this be happening? She had found a purpose, a reason, to live again in this little boy. And now, a stranger, A ghost from a past Leo didn't even remember, was going to take it all away. She felt a familiar hollowness return, the grief for a future with Leo layering over the old, deep grief for Daniel. She ended up at a small park, sinking onto a snow-dusted bench, oblivious to the cold. The tears she had held back finally came, silent and hot on her freezing cheeks. She was so lost in her misery that she didn't notice the man who stopped in front of her until he spoke. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice was deep and kind. Through her blurry vision, she saw him holding out a small pack of tissues. "You look like you could use these." He was a man about her age, with kind eyes and a face etched with a quiet sadness that she recognized instantly. He wasn't trying to flirt or interfere. He was just offering a simple, human kindness. She took the tissues with a mumbled, "Thank you," trying to compose herself. He didn't leave. He simply stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, as if he understood that sometimes a silent presence is more comforting than empty words. "Tough day?" he asked gently. She managed a watery, humorless laugh. "You could say that." Something about his gentle demeanour made her want to talk. "I thought my life was finally starting over," she heard herself say. "I was going to adopt a little boy, a wonderful 7-year-old boy, and today I found out his long-lost uncle has shown up out of nowhere to claim him." The man's expression shifted, a look of shock and dawning realization on his face. He took a hesitant step closer. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice strained. I just lost my brother, my younger brother. His son is in a group home here." The world stopped spinning. The gentle snowfall, the quiet park, the distant city lights. It all faded away. Eleanor stared at him, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. "The boy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Is his name Leo?" The man's face confirmed her worst fear. He nodded slowly, his own eyes wide with disbelief. "My name is Ethan," he said. "I'm Leo's uncle." They stood in the silent, falling snow, two strangers bound by their love for the same child, and now the architects of each other's heartbreak. The kindness in his eyes was still there, but now it was shadowed by a deep, shared sorrow. They ended up in a 24-hour coffee shop, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights. The story came out in a rush. Ethan had been working overseas on a long-term contract when his brother and sister-in-law had been killed. The news had shattered him. He'd immediately started the process of coming home, but it was complicated by a messy divorce he was going through. He'd had to sell his house, find a new place to live, and get his own life stable before he could even think about taking on the responsibility of a grieving child. "I didn't want to bring him into more chaos," he explained, his voice thick with guilt. "I wanted to be ready for him. I never imagined someone else." He trailed off, looking at Eleanor with a pained expression. The next day, they went to the group home together. When Leo was brought into the visiting room and saw both Eleanor and Ethan standing there, his face lit up with a brilliant, confused smile. He ran forward, instinctively trying to hug both of them at once, his small arms stretching between them. "You're both here!" he exclaimed, pure joy in his voice. But then his smile faltered as he sensed the tension in the room. He looked from Eleanor's sad eyes to Ethan's worried face. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice suddenly small. The joy of the moment evaporated, replaced by the heavy weight of the impossible situation they had created for this little boy. Over milkshakes at the same diner where Eleanor had first brought him, they tried to explain. They spoke in gentle, careful terms, telling him how much they both loved him and wanted to be his family. But Leo's 7-year-old mind understood the devastating bottom line. He had to choose. His face crumpled, and the milkshake sat untouched. "But I don't want to choose," he whispered, tears rolling down his cheeks and splashing onto the tabletop. "I want both of you. Why can't I have both of you?" The simple, heartbreaking logic of a child's wish silenced them both. They had been so focused on their own rights, their own pain, their own loss, that they had lost sight of his. He wasn't a prize to be won. He was a child who had already lost one family and was now terrified of losing another. As they sat in the quiet diner, watching Leo's small shoulders shake with silent sobs, Ethan looked at Eleanor. The conflict in his eyes was gone, replaced by a look of sudden, radical clarity. "He's right," Ethan said softly, his voice full of conviction. "Why does he have to choose?" He turned to Leo. "What if we didn't make you choose? What if we all tried to be a family, together?" Eleanor stared at him, stunned. He wasn't just talking about visitation. The look in his eyes was proposing something bigger, crazier, and more wonderful than she could have imagined. "I can find a job here," Ethan continued, his words gathering momentum. "We could find a house big enough for all of us. It won't be easy, but for him, we could try." In that moment, Eleanor saw not an obstacle, but a partner. A new, uncertain, and utterly unexpected path forward opened up before them. That day in the diner wasn't an ending, but a new, improbable beginning. The road ahead wasn't simple. It was filled with legal complexities, emotional adjustments, and the slow, careful work of building a family from the broken pieces of 3 separate lives. But they did it. Eleanor officially adopted Leo, and Ethan became a constant, loving presence in their lives, a dedicated uncle who was there for every baseball game and parent-teacher conference. Eventually, their shared love for a little boy blossomed into a love for each other. 2 years later, they stood together not as rivals, but as husband and wife, a complete family. On Eleanor's 48th birthday, she received a handmade card from Leo. On it, in a child's careful print, were the words, "To the best mom in the world, I love you." She placed it on the mantel, right next to the picture of a smiling boy in a baseball uniform, her 2 sons side by side. Her heart, once a place of desolate silence, was finally, completely full. Thank you for watching this story. If it touched your heart, please give it a like. Subscribe for more emotional stories and share your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe that a family is defined by blood or by the bonds of love we choose to build?